On the cold marble floor of Capitol Hill, Jasmine Crockett locks eyes with Kash Patel as the world watches. She has just received a top-secret memo proving he manipulated national intelligence for a hidden political deal. He thought she'd stay silent. He thought no one would dare confront him. But when she speaks, one question cuts through the chamber like a blade. How many soldiers died because of your lies? What happens next turns a routine hearing into a national reckoning and forces America to ask, if she hadn't spoken, would we ever have known the truth? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Capitol Hill, 11:43 p.m. The building was almost empty. The usual noise, footsteps, phones ringing, doors opening, had faded hours ago. Now there was only silence, broken by the soft hum of lights and the quiet tapping of rain on the windows. Inside her office, Jasmine Crockett sat alone. Her desk was cluttered with files and reports, but her eyes were fixed on one thing, a thick folder that had arrived just minutes earlier in an unmarked envelope. The message on her burner phone was simple. Package delivered. You're the last line. It came from someone she hadn't heard from in over a year, a former intelligence officer who had disappeared without warning. Jasmine knew right away. This was not just another late-night document dump. Something about it felt different, urgent, dangerous. She opened the folder with steady hands. Inside were 68 pages stamped, restricted for clearance level 5 only. These were not rumors or opinions. They were internal memos, direct quotes, meeting logs, all pointing to one man, Kash Patel. The documents revealed a clear pattern. Patel had ordered several intelligence analysts to revise their threat assessments. Reports about cyber attacks from foreign actors were edited to look less serious. Mentions of specific countries and targets were removed entirely, and nowhere in the paperwork was there any record of oversight or legal review. It was manipulation, cold, calculated, and real. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. The weight of what she just read hit her like a wave. These weren't just edits. These were lies presented as fact. Lies that may have shaped national policy, military movements, even foreign relations. If this was true, then thousands of people had been misled. Soldiers, diplomats, voters, everyone. And no one had ever been held responsible. She stood and walked to the tall window, looking out over the dark city. The rain had started to fall harder now, leaving streaks on the glass. She saw her own reflection, tired, focused, not afraid. She thought about the people who had trusted her to speak for them, the veterans, the single mothers, the students working 2 jobs. She thought about the young man she'd met last month whose brother never came home from deployment, his death blamed on unexpected resistance that maybe should have been predicted. And then she thought of Patel, still smiling on television, still being praised by people who had no idea what he'd done behind closed doors. She turned back to the folder. She picked up her phone, opened her voice recorder, and pressed the red button. Her voice was low, steady. They count on our silence. Then she closed the folder, placed her hand on top of it, and said aloud, like a promise to herself and to the country, if I stay quiet, I'm no better than him. The clock hit midnight. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett made a decision that would change everything. The moment the clock struck midnight, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just prepared, she was armed with the truth. By the time the sun rose over Capitol Hill, she would either stand alone in the fire or bring the whole building down with her. The hearing room was already filled when Jasmine arrived, not just with people, but with pressure, thick, heavy, almost physical. The kind of tension that made even experienced staffers keep their voices low and their backs straight. Dozens of reporters crowded the back rows, their eyes trained on the seats in front, waiting for a spark. Cameras were mounted along every wall, blinking red and ready to broadcast the smallest flicker of drama to millions across the country. This wasn't just a policy debate, it was a battlefield, and everyone knew the 2 names it had been built for, Crockett versus Patel. Kash Patel entered exactly at 9 a.m., walking with a smooth confidence that bordered on arrogance. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his smirk, familiar from television appearances, widened with every step he took. He paused just long enough at the witness table to let the cameras get a clean shot, then took his seat like he had already won. He nodded to the chair, leaned back in his chair, and waited for the show to begin. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett was already seated. She hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shifted the energy of the room. In front of her was a thick folder, 68 pages of classified material that didn't just raise questions, it exposed answers. Written in bold red ink across the cover were 3 words: for the people. She kept one hand resting lightly on the folder, the other on the nameplate in front of her. Her posture was upright but grounded, like someone who knew exactly what storm she was about to walk into and wasn't planning to blink. The chairman, a Republican known for his balanced stance and careful tone, gavelled the hearing to order. His opening remarks were formal, scripted, and deliberately bland, about bipartisan oversight and the need for transparency. But even he knew the room wasn't there for process. They were waiting for the break in the surface, the crack, the first real blow. Jasmine listened without expression, her eyes focused not on the chairman, not even on Patel, but on the clock behind them. She was measuring time, measuring silence. Then, with no warning, she leaned forward and spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It cut straight through the air, clean, controlled, and deeply intentional. Mr. Patel, do you remember what you said in the secure briefing room on June 17th, 2022? The room stopped breathing. A few heads turned, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Patel's expression flickered, barely, but enough to catch on camera. He sat up straighter, lips tightening just slightly as if searching for the right expression to hide behind. It wasn't on his prep sheet. It wasn't in the talking points. Jasmine hadn't just gone off script. She had just lit the fuse. She didn't smile. She didn't repeat herself. She simply locked eyes with him, still and direct, her fingers now resting on the edge of the folder, as if it were a switch that could flip the entire hearing upside down. And in that silence, everyone in the room felt it. Not just the weight of the question, but the shift in power. This wasn't a hearing anymore. This was the beginning of a reckoning. The silence after Jasmine's question wasn't empty, it was loaded. Everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was the moment something broke. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With steady hands, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small black device. Unmarked, no brand, cold to the touch. It looked almost ordinary, like a power bank, but everyone watching could feel it wasn't. She set it on the desk in front of her, thumbed the biometric scanner, and watched the soft green light flicker to life. Then she spoke, not to Patel, but to the chairman. "I have a recording," she said simply, "previously unreleased. The voice on it belongs to Mr. Patel." The room froze. A few heads turned. Someone in the back dropped a pen, and it rolled against the marble floor with a soft clink. Jasmine connected the device to the chamber's audio system and nodded toward the technician. "Play it." A low hiss came through the speakers, then silence, then a voice, clear, recognizable, without distortion. "Real intelligence will cause panic. I need them quiet. We don't need panic. We need control." It wasn't a guess. It wasn't edited. It was Kash Patel, in his own words, giving an order that could rewrite history. The room didn't react right away, almost as if it couldn't. Then the air changed. Reporters glanced at one another. Committee members leaned forward in their seats. It wasn't outrage yet. It was something deeper, realization. This wasn't political anymore. It was personal. It was institutional. The chairman's voice cut through the heavy quiet, calm but urgent. "Representative Crockett, do you have a means of verifying the source and authenticity of that file?" Jasmine nodded and produced a second device, a slim, silver module that lit up instantly on touch. The screen displayed a clear digital chain of custody: dates, locations, access codes, and most importantly, fingerprints. Her fingerprints, the whistleblowers, and metadata from the original meeting room. Jasmine handed it to the clerk. "It's fully traceable, unaltered, time-stamped and stored in an encrypted federal archive. She didn't blink. She didn't shift. She knew exactly what she was holding. Patel, until then silent, jolted forward in his seat, his jaw clenched, voice raised, not in confidence, but in desperation. This is a setup. I don't confirm that recording is real. Anyone can fake audio these days. His words spilled fast, rushed, as though trying to outrun the weight of what had already landed. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. His knee bounced slightly, uncontrolled. He wasn't answering. He was unraveling. Jasmine didn't react. She waited. Then after a beat, she spoke. Quiet but sharp, like a steel needle through fabric. You don't need to confirm it, Mr. Patel. The truth confirms itself. That was the moment the room changed for good. Her voice carried across the marble walls, not with volume, but with conviction. She wasn't trying to win the room. She was speaking directly to the people watching beyond it. Those at home, those who had doubted, those who had waited too long for someone to stand up and say what needed to be said. And now it had been said. The truth didn't ask for permission. It didn't beg for approval. It simply stood and made liars sit down. The words, "the truth confirms itself," had barely settled when Jasmine, with the composure of someone who had waited months for this moment, struck again, not louder but deeper. This wasn't escalation. This was exposure. I'd like to call a witness, she said, not as a request but as a quiet declaration. The room tensed, not in confusion, but in instinct. Everyone, from staffers to senators, knew that when surprises happened during a congressional hearing, they were either political theater or nuclear-grade truth. And Jasmine didn't do theater. The chairman hesitated, unsure whether to object. But one look at her, calm, unblinking, made him simply nod. From the far-left entrance, two federal officers stepped into the chamber, walking with a sense of gravity that shifted the entire room. Between them was a person in a gray tailored suit, posture rigid, hands folded in front, face half covered by a matte black identity mask. It wasn't dramatic, it was protocol, and the effect was chilling. This wasn't just a whistleblower. This was someone who had been silenced and protected. The witness sat down carefully, adjusting the microphone like they had rehearsed it 100 times alone in a hotel room under an alias. Every movement was precise, controlled, but not out of confidence, out of survival. The chairman, still catching up, cleared his throat. Please state your name and role for the record. I cannot state my name publicly. I am appearing today under the protections afforded by the federal whistleblower statute, the voice said, mechanically at first, but unmistakably human. It was a voice carrying the weight of months of silence. I served as a Level 3 intelligence analyst at the CIA from 2017 until August 2022. I was part of the interagency team that developed threat assessments on foreign cyber operations targeting critical U.S. infrastructure, including water, energy, and communication systems. The room grew still. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The truth was starting to unspool on its own. In March 2022, I was directed to submit preliminary drafts of 2 reports for internal review. Both drafts indicated increased foreign activity targeting our grid systems, activity that, if not addressed, posed a real and imminent risk. I submitted the drafts along with source documentation. Days later, I was called into a secure meeting with Mr. Patel and 2 other senior officials. Mr. Patel reviewed the documents and stated directly, "This kind of language will create panic. Adjust it. Focus on resilience, not exposure." The witness's hand trembled slightly as they reached for a glass of water, took a slow sip, and continued. I told him I would not alter verified intelligence to fit a political strategy. The next day, I was reassigned to a non-operational desk role with no clearance access. My badge was flagged for internal review. Within a week, my access to the CIA network was cut entirely, and my career was effectively ended. They took a breath, not for effect, but out of necessity. But it didn't stop there. That sentence sent a wave through the chamber. Some leaned forward. Patel's jaw flexed slightly. His fingers had stopped tapping. 3 weeks later, someone accessed my personnel file and redacted portions of my clearance evaluation. A week after that, my spouse received 2 anonymous emails containing personal details from my file that had never been public. Threats, photos, times of day when we leave the house. It was clear I was being warned. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, voice low, almost like she was speaking to one person. Do you have documentation to support that chain of events? The witness nodded. I've provided this committee with full copies of my original reports, metadata records, internal emails, and security incident logs. All traceable, all time-stamped. Then slowly they placed a thin drive on the table. That includes the original language I submitted and the altered version Mr. Patel signed. Jasmine turned toward the AV technician. Bring up the footage. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the screen behind the witness table blinked to life. The video was from an internal security camera. No audio, just a grainy but steady image of Patel standing inside a secure federal briefing room, time-stamped May 3rd, 2022. He was flipping through a stack of papers, two different versions of the same report laid side by side. One bore a visible stamp, original, unmodified. The other, final, cleared for release. The changes were obvious even without the words. Redacted paragraphs, margin notes, entire pages missing. Patel looked down at the second version, paused, then signed his name in slow, deliberate strokes. There was no sound in the room, not from the audience, not from the chairman, not even from Patel. The video cut to black. Then the screen held a single still image. Patel's signature, just below a line that read, Final intelligence clearance for interagency distribution. No one spoke. Jasmine didn't have to say anything. She didn't stand. She didn't smile. She simply folded her hands and waited. For the room, for the silence, for the weight of the evidence to do what it had to do. And in that silence, every person watching knew what they had just seen. A government official didn't just manipulate intelligence. He destroyed the integrity of an entire system. And someone had risked everything to prove it. But as the truth settled like dust over the room, the man at the center of it all didn't retreat. Instead, he reached for the oldest weapon in the book. Deflection through insult. Patel sat up straight, his face flushed with something between fury and humiliation. The video had cornered him, and he knew it. But instead of defending the evidence, he leaned into the microphone, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. This is all very dramatic, he said, scanning the committee, and very on brand. You've got a narrative and she, he jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, plays her part well. The fearless outsider, the underdog, the crusader for justice. Except we all know what this really is. He paused for effect, letting the silence fill with tension, then delivered the line like a punch. You've made a career out of weaponizing your skin color and your background. You're not fighting for truth, Representative. You're performing. For your base, for the cameras, for the headlines. A collective gasp broke through the chamber. Quiet, stunned, sharp. Reporters looked up from their laptops. Aides froze. Even the chairman's pen stopped mid-stroke. It wasn't just what Patel had said. It was the casual venom behind it. As if the truth she had just exposed could be dismissed by painting her as an opportunist. As if her intelligence, her preparation, her restraint, meant nothing because of where she came from and how she looked. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. The blow had landed, but it hadn't shaken her. If anything, it clarified the stakes. Because what Patel had just done wasn't just personal, it was systemic. He wasn't defending himself. He was trying to put her back in her place, and the room knew it. Everyone did. Patel's attack wasn't just a deflection. It was a calculated wound, aimed at the foundation of who Jasmine was. But it didn't crush her. It clarified her. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She sat still, stone still, as if measuring the exact shape of the disrespect thrown her way. Around her, the hearing room hung in an electric stillness, tight with discomfort, thick with tension. Patel's words had been like a toxin released in the air, subtle in delivery, but potent in intent. He hadn't just questioned her credentials. He had tried to erase the cost of her presence, to reduce her story to a stunt. The worst part wasn't that he said it. It was that he'd said it like he'd said it before, in rooms like this, to people like her, and gotten away with it. But this wasn't one of those rooms, and she wasn't one of those people. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even lean forward. Her hands remained clasped in front of her, steady, strong. Her voice, when it came, was deliberate, low, clear. "You're right," she said. "I do come from the streets. Not as an apology, not as a confession, as a declaration." Each word stood on its own, like a brick being laid in stone. "I come from places where sirens are lullabies and ambition is seen as betrayal, where classrooms are overcrowded and courtrooms are never empty, where people survive more systems than they ever escape." She paused, not to gather herself, but to give the truth room to breathe. "And I never once denied it. I didn't rewrite my story to make you comfortable. I brought it here, into this room, into this hearing, because this building doesn't just belong to the polished and the pedigreed. It belongs to the people, all of them, especially the ones you're hoping will never feel invited inside." The weight of her voice filled every corner of the chamber. Patel shifted slightly, but she didn't look at him yet. She was still speaking to the system. "I don't have the right connections. I didn't clerk for powerful judges or ride in on a legacy. What I have is what you can't fake, lived experience. What I bring into this chamber is not a performance. It's a record. It's a history, one that people like you keep trying to edit out." Then finally she turned and looked him in the eye. Her expression wasn't angry, it was surgical, focused, final. "You didn't come from the streets, Mr. Patel. You came from the shadows. And you've spent your career dragging this country deeper into them, burying truth, silencing dissent, shaping lies in dark rooms and calling it policy." She let that sit. No emotion, just truth, sharp, clean, undeniable. "You've weaponized your position to protect the powerful, and you thought no one would see. You thought the mask of authority was enough to erase your trail. But you didn't count on one thing. Some of us learned how to fight back without power. We learned how to speak when we weren't handed a microphone. And we learned that when someone tries to shame you for where you come from, it usually means they're terrified of where you're going." There was still no applause, just silence. The kind that comes when something real has been said. The kind of silence people don't forget. The kind that doesn't need headlines because it already echoes. Patel had tried to smear her name, question her worth, and twist the truth. But Jasmine wasn't in that room to prove her identity. She was there to expose his. And what came next wasn't opinion. It was evidence, cold and final. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat or glance for approval. Instead, she reached into her case with slow, deliberate precision, like someone lighting a match she knew would change the air in the room. What she pulled out was not thick, not flashy, but heavy in a different way. A plain manila folder secured with a red tape seal and marked in capital letters. "Authorized eyes only. Classified oversight file." She placed it gently on the table before her fingers resting on the seal for a moment longer than necessary. Then she spoke, not with drama, but with absolute clarity. "This is a certified chain of custody intelligence log, recently declassified for congressional review," she said. "It details the unauthorized transfer of a classified intelligence package to a private, unsecured server located in Palm Beach County, Florida." A beat. The transfer was personally approved, signed, and time-stamped by Mr. Kash Patel. The air collapsed. Not literally, but emotionally. Every person in the chamber seemed to shrink into their chairs at once. Jasmine didn't pause. She continued with chilling calm. "The file in question contained threat-level assessments from 4 intelligence agencies regarding cyber intrusion vulnerabilities within domestic energy infrastructure. It was sent outside the federal network, unencrypted, without proper clearance or internal notice." Her voice sharpened, barely but intentionally. "And that same file disappeared from government tracking systems for 62 days. During that time, no one knew where it was, who accessed it, or if it had been copied or leaked." Her words weren't colored by speculation. They were built entirely on the certainty of the paper in front of her. "The server in question is now part of an ongoing national investigation involving multiple unsecured transmissions of classified material," she added. "And as of today, We have in our possession proof that Mr. Patel was not only aware of the transmission, but facilitated it. Her finger tapped the folder once. His signature appears on the clearance log. Page 4. That was the moment the silence changed shape. No longer tense, it turned stunned, hollow, dangerous. One Republican committee member, a war veteran and longtime intelligence hawk, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face, once indifferent, now looked bruised by disbelief. Another member, seated 3 chairs down, leaned in and whispered, his voice not meant to carry, but caught nonetheless by a hot mic. This is beyond red lines. No one moved, not Patel, not the press, not even the chairman, whose hands had been folded for 20 minutes straight, now rested near the gavel like it had suddenly become necessary. His lips parted slightly, as though he wanted to interrupt, but nothing came out. Only Jasmine's words remained, hanging in the room like smoke. Then at last he cleared his throat. "We'll recess this hearing for 10 minutes, he said, the words brittle at the edges. "All members are advised to review the submitted document immediately and privately." The gavel dropped, once, twice, harder than necessary. What followed wasn't noise, it was movement, a wave of it. Staffers scrambling, reporters rushing out the doors, phones pressed to their ears, faces pale with what they just heard. Some members stood frozen, staring at the folder like it might burn through the table. Others walked quickly toward the side chamber, heads down. But in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. She didn't lean back. She didn't even shift in her seat. She simply watched. Watched the consequences of truth begin to unfold. And in that stillness, surrounded by chaos, she didn't look victorious. She looked resolute. Because she knew the hardest part of exposing the darkness is staying calm while it panics. The 10-minute recess had come and gone, but the silence it left behind hadn't. People returned to their seats with stiff movements and unreadable faces. But everyone knew it. The hearing was no longer about policy. It had become something heavier, something dangerous. Kash Patel re-entered the chamber, flanked by 2 attorneys. One took the seat behind him. The other hovered close, whispering something sharp and urgent into his left ear. His jaw was tight, and for the first time since the hearing began, his eyes didn't scan the room. He didn't look at the press, the chairman, or even his own bench. He looked only at the table, as if it might open and swallow him whole. Gone was the swagger that had marked his entrance hours ago. Now he looked like a man walking back into a room where the air had shifted in ways he couldn't control. The chairperson resumed the hearing with the same formality as before, but it felt rehearsed now, like someone reciting instructions during a plane crash. "Mr. Patel has retained legal counsel and per their advisement will invoke his Fifth Amendment rights for the remainder of the hearing." The chairman's voice was calm, but each word struck like a slow drum beat. "He will not be answering further questions." A ripple of murmurs spread behind the press wall, followed by the sound of a dozen phones being lifted to capture the moment. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't check her notes or glance at the cameras. She was still, utterly, painfully still, her eyes on Patel, her hands calmly resting on a folder that no longer needed to be opened. She waited just long enough for the noise to die down, and then she leaned forward. "Mr. Patel," she said, not with aggression, but with gravity. Her voice had none of the legalistic edge heard earlier. It was softer now, but unmistakably pointed, like steel beneath velvet. "I understand your legal right not to answer questions that may incriminate you. That is your choice." She let the words settle. "But I only have one question left. One that doesn't require an admission of guilt or a denial of anything at all." The room held its breath. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. She simply let the question come, measured, honest, and sharp enough to pierce bone. "How many soldiers have died because of the reports you altered?" The effect was immediate. Every movement in the room ceased. Even the background buzz, the low hum of AC vents and camera equipment, seemed to vanish into a vacuum. Patel didn't move, not a twitch. His eyes remained locked on the polished wood in front of him, but something behind them cracked, subtle but undeniable. His throat bobbed, his shoulders tightened. One of his lawyers placed a steadying hand on his arm, but Patel didn't react. There was no rebuttal, no legal defense, just stillness and the echo of the question, now suspended in the dead air between them like smoke from a battlefield. It wasn't rhetorical. Jasmine hadn't asked it for effect. She'd asked it because it needed to be said, because someone had to say it. "You may not answer," she continued, her voice slightly quieter, but no less focused. "But I want you to think about it. I want you to picture their faces, men and women who served this country with no knowledge that the intel guiding their missions had been tampered with for political convenience." Her tone never rose. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of truth sharpened to a blade. They made decisions based on data, moved through hostile territory based on numbers, walked into ambushes based on maps you signed off on. They didn't know, but you did. No one dared move. One of the congressional aides behind the chairperson subtly wiped tears from her cheek with the back of her hand, thinking no one noticed. One of the reporters, usually quick to tweet every breath, sat motionless, mouth slightly open, phone forgotten in her lap. Jasmine leaned in further now, just enough for Patel to feel the full weight of her gaze. "You never pulled a trigger, Mr. Patel, but your pen did." The line struck like a thunderclap, quiet but unstoppable. Patel still didn't look up. His hands were clenched so tightly in front of him, the skin had gone white around the knuckles. He opened his mouth once but said nothing. Not even his lawyer dared speak. Jasmine exhaled slowly, steadying the silence. "We have names now," she said, her voice suddenly softer, but somehow even more cutting. "Not just file numbers. Names, ranks, ages. Some of them had newborns when they deployed. Some of them were 2 weeks from coming home. Some of them—" She stopped, not because she faltered, but because she wouldn't weaponize their grief. "Some of them trusted the people in this room to give them the truth." The injustice didn't lie only in the deception. It lay in the fact that no one had told those families. No one had connected the dots between intelligence fabrication and flag-draped coffins. Until now. She looked toward the chairman, not asking for permission, but as a reminder of who this room was supposed to serve. "We talk about oversight," she said, "about accountability, but it can't mean anything if people can manipulate intelligence, then hide behind legal counsel while others pay the price in blood." She looked back at Patel now, gaze calm but damning. "You don't owe me an answer. You owe them one." That was when Patel finally moved. Not much, just a shift, a deep breath, and a slight downward tilt of his head as if the weight had finally settled on him. His lawyer whispered something again, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. There was no spin left, no exit line, no salvaging the optics. Because the moment wasn't about optics anymore. It was about truth and the cost of bearing it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the things no one wanted to name. Guilt, shame, duty, and the memory of lives sacrificed under false pretenses. Jasmine didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The question had already done what it needed to do. And in that final breathless stillness, with cameras rolling and every eye on Patel, the room felt less like a hearing and more like a trial where only one person knew they'd already been sentenced. The silence from Patel after Jasmine's final question was more than avoidance. It was surrender. But she wasn't finished. The truth had more layers, and she had saved the darkest one for last. Jasmine reached into her folder once more. No hesitation, no dramatic flair, just the quiet precision of someone walking straight through a door she knew would not be closed behind her. This time, what she held wasn't stamped, classified, or marked with security codes. It was plain white paper, printed from an anonymous source, but authenticated by independent forensic experts. "I'd like to enter into the record a series of emails obtained by a protected source," she said, her tone controlled, clinical, but carrying the low voltage of something dangerous. "These exchanges are between Mr. Patel and senior representatives of a private intelligence consulting firm known as Midian Strategies, which has received substantial dark money contributions from multiple unnamed donors." She paused. The subject line of the lead message reads, quote, "Adjustment request, mutual legal security." A quiet ripple moved through the chamber. She tapped the paper lightly on the desk. In simpler terms, a deal, help shift intelligence narratives, and in exchange, receive funding for legal defense. She let the words settle like dust over the room. And they did, heavily. The chairman leaned forward, frowning. Are these communications verified? They are, Jasmine replied. Through a third-party authentication protocol, full header data, IP tracebacks, and hash signatures have been preserved. They've been reviewed by the Oversight Committee in closed session. All members here were notified of the packet submission 2 hours prior to the hearing. Her words weren't sharp, but they left no room for denial. Jasmine flipped to the first page. Email dated April 9th, 2022, from a Midian executive. We'll ensure the language in the March 21st summary reaches the right ears. If you can guarantee coordination and confirmation by end of Q2, in return, legal support is already set aside from the domestic fund. Discretion is assumed. She looked up, then directly at Patel. Care to explain what legal support was being purchased in exchange for coordination on intelligence language? Patel said nothing. His face had drained of color. He reached into his jacket slowly, pulled out a handkerchief, and dabbed at the sweat building on his temple. He no longer tried to speak over her, no longer shifted in theatrical annoyance. This time, he looked like a man who understood the walls were not only closing in, they had already locked. Mr. Patel? Jasmine asked again, this time softer, more surgical than confrontational. Did you knowingly allow private actors to influence the content of federal threat reports in exchange for personal legal protection? Her tone didn't accuse, it unveiled. One committee member leaned forward, lips parted, stunned. Another shook his head slowly, stunned that the hearing had descended from defense into exposure so completely. Patel's lips parted slightly. A tremor ran across his jaw. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no answer came. Instead, he wiped his brow again, more forcefully this time. Then, with eyes lowered and voice rough like gravel dragged across dry cement, he spoke. I cannot confirm or deny the contents of that email chain. A single sentence, 9 words, and yet they thundered across the room louder than any denial ever could. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, acknowledging, not celebrating. Let the record reflect that the witness does not dispute the authenticity of the documents. Her hands folded again, still calm, still controlled. But her voice held something else now, a solemn weight that had grown heavier with every layer peeled back. We've heard testimony about misused power. We've seen evidence of altered intelligence, lost data, compromised national security. But this isn't just negligence. This is corruption in its purest form, trading truth for protection and doing so while cloaked in clearance. Patel said nothing. He couldn't. His entire body language, folded shoulders, downward gaze, clenched hands, was that of a man stripped of defense. His lawyers didn't interrupt. Even they seemed to understand that nothing they could say would rewrite the moment that had just unfolded. The chairperson looked stunned. For the first time all day, he didn't reach for his gavel. He didn't ask for silence. He didn't move, because everyone in the room understood the magnitude of what had just been spoken into the record. It wasn't just political scandal. It wasn't even just national betrayal. It was personal, real, human, the kind of truth that lives in whispers and footnotes, until someone like Jasmine Crockett walks in and reads it aloud in full voice, in full light. One of the younger staffers along the back wall covered her mouth. A reporter shook his head slowly, typing nothing. There were no notes that could capture what had just been said. No spin that could frame it softer. Jasmine sat back slightly, her eyes still locked on Patel. You don't have to confirm it. The silence did that for you. Her voice remained calm, but her words were like a closing door. What matters now is that the country knows. They know what happened. They know why. And they know who. Patel exhaled, slow and ragged, as if he had been holding his breath through the entire collapse of his career. And all Jasmine did was sit still, hands folded, eyes clear, not triumphant, not cruel, just truthful, because she hadn't come here to crush a man. She'd come to hold one accountable for the lies he had signed, the silence he had sold, and the trust he had betrayed. The hearing had ended, but its impact hadn't. Truth once spoken has a velocity of its own, and by the next morning, it was already moving faster than anyone could control. Within 12 hours of the hearing's adjournment, the transcript had been downloaded over 5 million times. Clips of Jasmine's questioning flooded every major news outlet. Her line, "You didn't pull the trigger, Mr. Patel, but your pen did," trended across platforms, translated into 7 languages, and plastered across evening news banners from Washington to London. But while the public erupted with shock, outrage, and vindication, something quieter was happening behind closed doors. Something faster, more precise. Before the sun even rose on the East Coast, the FBI had launched a preliminary review, not just based on the documents submitted, but on the consistency between Patel's silence and the mountains of evidence now under federal seal. By 8:04 a.m., an internal memo had been circulated within the Department of Justice. Its subject line was unambiguous: Preliminary Clearance Suspension Request, Kash Patel. At 8:37 a.m., the FBI formally notified the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and by 9:05 a.m., an order was signed. Patel was to be summoned for immediate questioning, his active clearances frozen pending full investigation. The command was quiet but absolute. No press releases, no cameras, just a message delivered straight to his counsel. Your client is expected at the Hoover Building by 2 p.m. today. No exceptions. Patel was in his private residence outside Alexandria when he received the call. According to sources later cited in leaked briefings, he didn't react with anger. He didn't throw anything, shout, or deny. He simply sat down on the edge of his kitchen counter and stared at the floor, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the line had gone dead. The silence of consequence had arrived. Not public yet, not dramatic, but lethal in its precision. And unlike the hearings, there would be no stage to spin this part, no friendly pundits, no lifeline of ambiguity. At exactly 1:52 p.m., Patel walked into the J. Edgar Hoover Building with one attorney and no entourage. He wore a navy blue suit and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. Waiting for him were 3 federal agents from the National Security Division and 2 intelligence officers from the DOJ's Office of Counterintelligence. No one smiled. No one greeted him by name. He was escorted past the reception, through 2 checkpoints, and into a soundproofed interview room designed for high-clearance debriefs. The walls were gray. The lighting was soft, but the silence was surgical. On the table lay a black folder, thinner than Jasmine's but heavier in consequence. Inside, authenticated copies of the emails, the server logs, the signed transfer order, and the whistleblower's original memo, now corroborated by 2 independent sources. Patel sat down slowly, his attorney to his left. No cuffs, no formal arrest. But the gravity was unmistakable. The kind of room where careers didn't end loudly. They collapsed under the weight of paper and silence. "We'll begin by confirming the integrity of your clearance pathway," one agent said, voice flat. "At this time, your access to classified materials, secured systems, and active policy briefings is formally suspended under federal statute." He slid a typed notification across the table. "This is the preliminary suspension of your Tier 3 clearance authority, effective immediately. You are not to access any classified network, device, or contact under Title 50 operations until further notice." Patel stared at the page, then nodded once. Barely. His lawyer attempted a procedural objection, something about needing more time to review the chain of custody, but it was ignored. The agents weren't here to argue. They were here to document, to listen, to give Patel a chance to speak before the narrative was written without him. But he said nothing. No denial, no protest, no rebuttal. He simply folded his hands in front of him, elbows tight, shoulders drawn in like a man trying to shrink inside himself. Outside, the media hadn't caught wind yet. There were no vans, no reporters. But inside the intelligence community, the shockwaves were already moving. At Langley, his profile was flagged as pending declassification. At Fort Meade, a mirror audit had begun on every document he had signed or reviewed over the last 30 months. And in a sealed chamber beneath the Capitol, A separate review panel had been summoned, tasked with one question: was there a deliberate effort to manipulate intelligence policy for personal legal protection? Jasmine Crockett had done her part in the open. Now the machine was doing its part in the dark. For Patel, the loss of clearance wasn't just a suspension. It was a collapse of identity. Clearance had been his shield, his currency, his cloak of power. Without it, he wasn't a policymaker. He wasn't even a reliable witness. He was just a man with secrets and fewer allies every hour. As the interview continued, agents didn't yell or accuse. They didn't need to. They asked about timelines, about who else knew, about the metadata trail, about the off-site meetings with legal defense liaisons. Patel's lawyer answered most of it, but toward the end, one agent leaned forward, lowered his voice, and asked, "Was it worth it?" Patel didn't respond, not because he didn't know, but because he did. The session ended at 5:12 p.m. No handshakes, no conclusions, just documents signed, badges returned, and an escort back to the private elevator that led to the underground exit. Patel stepped out into a cold wind with no press, no photos, no statement, only silence. But across the country, the public had already filled the gap. News of the FBI summons leaked at 6:47 p.m., confirmed by 3 anonymous federal sources, and picked up within minutes by every major network. The headline was swift and brutal: Kash Patel summoned by FBI, security clearance suspended in wake of explosive hearing. By 9 p.m., the country knew what the hearing had only begun to unveil. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a breach, a betrayal, a reckoning. And for the first time in years, the man who had once moved in and out of classified rooms like a shadow had been pulled into the light. And there, finally, the system turned its full attention to him, quietly, precisely, irreversibly. By the time Patel walked out of the Hoover building under federal summons, the institutions that once shielded him were already starting to fracture, and the media battleground was the first to splinter. The right-wing media ecosystem, long known for its discipline and unity, began to crack in real time. What had been a reliable chorus of defense, the same headlines, the same spin, suddenly shifted into dissonance. That night at exactly 7:03 p.m., Fox News anchor Troy Bledsoe opened his segment not with defiance, but with hesitation. If these documents are what they appear to be, then this goes beyond politics. Within minutes, the echo chamber splintered. Some hosts doubled down, calling the hearing a witch hunt and labeling Jasmine Crockett a grandstanding radical who weaponized the process. But others, more cautious, more calculated, began to walk backward without admitting it. Phrases like "still gathering facts," "troubling if true," and "unconfirmed but concerning" peppered the primetime panels. On Newsmax, a normally Patel-friendly commentator fell quiet after a live caller asked, "Would you let your son walk into combat with intel written by this man?" The shift wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, the kind of silence that creeps in when power senses it's backing the wrong figure. Patel's defenders no longer led with confidence. They hedged. They deflected. They changed the subject. A well-known think tank quietly deleted 3 articles praising his leadership. A former ally on Capitol Hill tweeted a vague call for renewed integrity and intelligence, without mentioning his name. The rift widened when an internal leak from a conservative publication revealed an editorial order. "Hold on, Patel pieces. Await DOJ developments." It wasn't betrayal, it was abandonment, coded in plausible deniability. Meanwhile, the rest of the country had already moved faster than the networks. On Twitter, on TikTok, in classrooms and comment threads and op-ed columns, one name surged forward. Not Patel's, but Jasmine's. She had gone from relative unknown to household name overnight, not because she had shouted or grandstanded or played to the cameras, but because she had done something almost extinct in modern government. She had simply told the truth and refused to flinch. One clip of her questioning, "You didn't pull the trigger, Mr. Patel, but your pen did," had over 42 million views by morning. It was remixed into protest songs, taught in civics classes, turned into murals in 2 different cities. But more than all that, it prompted a singular question to dominate the national conversation. If Jasmine Crockett hadn't been in that room, would the country have ever known? The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a mirror. And people didn't like what they saw. Talk radio lit up with callers, not pundits, not politicians, ordinary veterans, military families, civil servants. A retired colonel from Georgia called into a national program and said, "I've read every word of that transfer report. That's not politics, that's betrayal." And that woman had the guts to say it out loud while everyone else sat there afraid. Another caller, a nurse whose husband had been deployed during the years in question, broke down mid-sentence, her voice cracking as she whispered, "We trusted the system. We trusted the paper in front of us. And it was a lie." Jasmine's face appeared on magazine covers, not as a celebrity, but as a warning shot, an image of a woman who had walked into a room built to silence her and refused to leave quietly. The New York Times ran a full-page headline, "The Truth She Refused to Edit." A Washington Post op-ed simply read, "Her questions changed the room, and then the country." But not everyone welcomed the truth. She received threats, dozens, anonymous messages, veiled warnings, hate mail disguised as concern. Online forums accused her of treason. A small but vocal group began spreading conspiracies, claiming the documents were fake, the witness staged, the evidence planted. Some pundits on fringe networks accused her of undermining national security for personal gain. But the more they shouted, the more they revealed their desperation. Because the evidence wasn't going away. The signatures weren't going away. The whistleblower wasn't retracting. And Jasmine wasn't backing down. In fact, she hadn't said a word publicly since the hearing ended. No interviews, no victory lap, no self-congratulations. Just silence. And the storm it left in her wake. For those watching closely, it was clear. Jasmine Crockett had never set out to go viral. She hadn't chased the spotlight. She had chased the truth. And that truth, once out, didn't need to scream. It had already landed. And now the country couldn't stop asking itself, why did it take her to say it? Where were the others? How long had this gone unchecked? Because if the truth could sit in a folder for months, hidden behind clearance stamps and sealed doors, if soldiers could die while someone quietly rewrote the threat levels, then the danger wasn't just one man named Patel. The danger was the system that thought it could get away with it until her. The country watched Kash Patel sink under the weight of undeniable evidence. But long after the hearings ended, the real reckoning arrived. Not in handcuffs or press releases, but in one woman's decision to face the public with nothing but truth. The air on the Capitol steps was brittle. Cold in that way only Washington in winter knows how to deliver. Clear sky, no wind, but a chill that settled into bone. Still the crowd gathered, not with protest signs or party colors, but in quiet numbers. Students, veterans, retired judges, journalists, mothers holding toddlers in fleece hats. They had come not for spectacle, not even for justice, but for the one thing the hearing had reminded them they were still owed: honesty. Dozens of cameras stood in perfect symmetry at the foot of the Capitol. Satellite vans lined the street like war trucks. In the hour before her scheduled remarks, news anchors murmured over teleprompters, unsure what tone to strike. Was this a victory lap? A resignation? A declaration of war? And then she emerged. Jasmine Crockett didn't walk out like a politician. She walked out like a woman who had just survived fire and come back holding the blueprints for the building she was ready to burn down. No staffers flanked her. No music played. Just the heavy echo of her heels on the marble as she stepped alone into the center of the platform, behind a simple podium framed by two rustling American flags. The microphones hissed as they came alive, but she waited. Her eyes swept across the sea of faces, blinking under the sharp morning light. She looked neither triumphant nor exhausted, only still, composed in a way that told everyone watching, this was not the end of something. This was the start of something much harder. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, measured, and so quiet at first that the crowd instinctively leaned forward. "This is not my victory," she began. "This is your wake-up call." Not applause, not chants. "Just breathe," she continued. "What you saw in that hearing room was not rare. It was not new. It was not shocking to the people who've spent years watching truth be buried in sealed folders, rewritten by people with clearance and immunity. What made it different was that this time, someone said no. Her words moved like waves, unhurried but undeniable. She didn't gesture, didn't lean on theatrics. She didn't need to, because every syllable was lined with the weight of what she had witnessed and what she had revealed. We talk a lot in this country about protecting freedom. But what is freedom if the truth can be bought? What is freedom if our soldiers die under the shadow of a lie? What is freedom if evidence disappears until someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose dares to say it out loud? The crowd still didn't clap, because this didn't feel like a speech. It felt like testimony. This isn't about party or power. This isn't about one man named Patel. This is about what happens when institutions are built to silence those who don't look like they belong, until one of us refuses to play along. Then she paused, and in the silence the only sound was the clicking of a single camera shutter. Then 2, then 20. If we don't protect the truth, she said, her voice now steady as iron, then the truth will fall into the hands of those who rewrite it. That line dropped into the cold air like an iron anchor. The crowd didn't cheer, but something deeper happened. Heads nodded, hands rose slowly to hearts. A few eyes filled with tears, not out of grief, but out of the rare shock that someone had finally said it, publicly, without flinching. Jasmine stood for a beat longer, letting the words hang. Then without a smile, without a wave, she stepped back from the podium and turned, and walked away. Not down the main stairs where cameras waited for close-ups, but to the side, through a narrow path cleared only minutes before. She moved past aides and marshals, past the marble lions, into a hallway of shadow that swallowed her without sound. The news cycle exploded within minutes. Her face flooded every major network. The line, "If we don't protect the truth," was played on repeat like scripture. Morning shows called it the most powerful speech since Watergate. An editor at The Atlantic tweeted, "This isn't a press conference, this is a doctrine." And then, like clockwork, came the speculation. Would she run? By noon, anonymous sources whispered that 3 donors had offered her a blank check to launch a Senate campaign. By 2 p.m., a PSC had been formed under her name, without her permission. By evening, panels of pundits argued over her future like she was no longer a person, but a symbol on a chessboard. The next morning she gave her answer. A single email. No press conference. No political theater. Just a plain white PDF posted to her congressional site. "I will not be seeking higher office. I am not interested in power. I am interested in prevention. Corruption does not begin at the top. It begins in the quiet. That's where I'll be." The internet fractured. Some hailed her as a patriot. Others called her a coward for not capitalizing on the moment. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't reply. She didn't spin, because she hadn't come to build a brand. She had come to tell the truth. She returned to her district, quietly. She resumed her work. She met with legal reform groups. She spoke at universities. She kept her head down in hearings no one broadcast, but where policies were quietly shaped, because Jasmine Crockett never believed justice lived in headlines. But the country did not forget. Clips of her questioning Patel were still taught in law schools 2 years later. A civics curriculum was rewritten in 3 states to include her final hearing exchange as an example of modern oversight. Students gave speeches in competitions quoting her word for word. Memorial scholarships were created in the names of soldiers whose deaths had been linked to falsified intelligence. And yet, one question never left the air. It was whispered on train rides and in newsroom halls, muttered by government analysts and law professors. If what Jasmine revealed was just the tip of the iceberg, then what's still buried beneath the surface? The question was too big for a single name, too frightening for a single answer. But it lingered. It still does. And after the hearings ended, after the headlines faded, and after Jasmine Crockett disappeared once more into the corridors of power, what remained wasn't just the silence she left behind. It was the lesson carved into the country's conscience like a scar. The real lesson of the Patel hearings didn't live in legal statutes or Senate memos. It wasn't written in the final report or buried inside classified folders. It lived in the space between Jasmine's questions and Patel's silence. It lived in the single trembling pause before she asked, "How many soldiers died because of the reports you altered?" It lived in the way a woman from a background the system was built to ignore stood against an intelligence officer backed by secrecy, wealth, and silence, and didn't blink. The message was clear, and it burned. In a world where power can edit the truth, integrity must be louder than access. Jasmine had no army, no donors, no safety net. She only had her voice, and she used it not to destroy, but to expose, not to rise, but to reveal. And in doing so, she reminded the country that the most dangerous people in a corrupt system are not those who shout. They're the ones who speak plainly when it's most dangerous to do so. The injustice she faced was not just personal, it was generational. She walked into that hearing carrying every room she'd been told to leave, every credential she'd had to earn twice, every moment she was talked over, doubted, or dismissed. Her skin, her gender, her accent, all of it had been used against her before the first question even left her mouth. But instead of folding under the weight, she turned it into gravity. She never raised her voice, because she didn't have to. The louder the world tried to ignore her, the more undeniable her presence became. And in that act of standing, of speaking, of not stepping back, she taught every person watching that resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands. Sometimes it asks a single question that shakes an empire. We often talk about heroes as people who change laws, win wars, or hold offices. But Jasmine's story redefined what heroism looks like in a democracy on the edge of forgetting itself. Her courage wasn't in confrontation, it was in clarity, in walking into a chamber stacked against her and trusting the truth to hold, in choosing to reveal the infection rather than wear the badge. She didn't chase cameras. She faced consequences, and her refusal to be seduced by power became a mirror for the rest of us, forcing us to ask how many truths we've allowed to be buried for comfort, for loyalty, for convenience. If there is a lasting human lesson in what happened, it is this: silence is not neutral. Every time a lie goes unchallenged, it learns to speak louder. Every time a voice like Jasmine's is ignored, the machinery of corruption spins faster. Truth needs more than facts. It needs people willing to carry it into rooms built to break them. People who do not wait to be invited, who do not apologize for existing, who speak not because it's safe, but because it's necessary. Jasmine Crockett didn't just reveal what one man did wrong. She revealed what a system lets happen when no one is watching. And now we are watching. Because once the truth is heard in a room meant to hide it, something changes. Not overnight, not easily, but permanently. Jasmine reminded us that justice is not a destination, it is a demand, one that lives in questions that make people uncomfortable, in moments when silence would be easier, in acts of moral defiance carried out without applause. Her lesson isn't just about Patel, it's about us, about what we tolerate, about what we excuse, about what we're willing to forget to preserve the illusion that everything is fine. But everything is not fine. And Jasmine didn't fix it. She just made sure we could no longer say we didn't know. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.